In 1994, Killer Instinct revolutionized the arcade scene with its cutting-edge graphics and combo-driven gameplay. Developed by Rare and published by Midway, it utilized advanced CGI technology and the powerful Ultra 64 hardware. It set new standards for fighting games, leaving a lasting legacy in arcade history. But did the console ports live up to fans' expectations? Let's find out. This is Arcade vs. Console.
It's the way you move to the killer groove.
The story of Killer Instinct VHS edition. When I was a kid, I was so obsessed with Killer Instinct that I actually drew hundreds of pictures to create animation sequences using a family friend's camcorder. I tilted the camera over each artwork like cell animation and took 1-second shots. That looks awkward, so I must have propped it up with a branch. I don't know how, but when I was done, it looked like a masterpiece to me. And in my version, there was scaling and FMV sequences, something you could not get at home. I was so excited about the way it was turning out, I told one of my friends at school, and then I told them, hey, and don't tell anybody else. I'm not sure, but somehow everyone in my class found out. They said it wasn't them who told, so I believed them. The next day, I had completed my project. I ejected the VHS, packed it up in my backpack, and got it ready to leave for school the next morning. Everybody had to see this ultimate version. So we took off for school the next morning, but then I realized that I forgot something. That's right, the joystick. Engineered from the finest bottle caps and spray-painted blue, and a custom cardboard hapstick, giving you a realistic arcade experience at home. When I got to school, my friend was waiting, and I handed the VHS over to him. And I was like, hey man, don't lose it, and be kind and rewind. He was like, yeah, whatever, dude. Because it was the grunge era. Little did I know, the next day when he showed up, the game was critically acclaimed. In my eyes, it looked like doodles, but to everybody else, it looked like this. Finally, I was cool for a couple days and everybody wanted to borrow my game. They couldn't believe their eyes when they saw it had scaling and a usable joystick, not to mention fancy pencil-shaded FMVs. But the rejoicing was short-lived because by the third day, somebody had, quote, lost the VHS. Needless to say, this was deeply saddening because it took me days to complete this project. But it does have a happy ending because when I shed that tear, I wished for a way to be able to play the arcade version anywhere at home. And now we have emulation. Oh, and well, that's the end of the story of the limited edition VHS Killer Instinct. Perfect. What is up, gamer fam, and welcome back to the channel. Today's episode of Arcade vs. Console is an exciting one. This year is the 30th anniversary of Killer Instinct. The game was originally released in October 28 of 1994. But before we get into the weeds of this, please remember if you enjoy this video to leave a like, and if you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. And of course, if there is a KI fan out there who you know will absolutely love this, please share it with them. When Killer Instinct hit the arcades in 1994, it blew gamers out of the water. It had cutting-edge graphics, fluid animation, and the most intense combos that we had ever experienced up to that point. Not to mention each character had multiple finishers. Needless to say, it set a new standard for fighting games and quickly became a fan favorite. There's a lot of really cool history with Killer Instinct, and I'm really excited to get into it with you guys. So we're gonna go down the rabbit hole of 1994, what was popular in the arcades at that time, and then get into the arcade version itself, the hardware, and the ports, and even the Ultra 64. All right, let's go. 1994 was a crazy year and the world was buzzing with unforgettable events. Angela Bassett celebrated her Golden Globe win, and Ace of Base topped the music charts with The Sign and their Uber 90s music video. Some of our favorite comedians were still with us and making us laugh on the reg. Home computers were becoming household staples. Blockbuster was still the all-time go-to for video rentals and a family favorite. EB Games had video games flying off the shelves. Marvel Universe stores were fan favorites. 1994 was also the year that we lost Kurt Cobain. And the nation was obsessed with the O.J. Simpson trial. Every day, people were tuning in on their television to find out what was going to happen. Johnny Depp was arrested for some bad behavior. And in California, Leon Williams was still in office. And late in the year, Tupac was acquitted of allegations made against him. Toys R Us was still around and Power Rangers were in. And while some might argue that arcades were dying, they were still thriving. In fact, let's take a look at the top 8 games of 1994. This is quite a roster which still holds up to this day, and coming in at number 1 was Killer Instinct. The mid-90s was the place to be if you loved fighting games, and Killer Instinct was a standout title that revolutionized the genre. The game's combo system was revolutionary and addictive. And to top that off, you had the Nintendo brand bolstering the Ultra 64, which made our kid minds think, wow, we're gonna get this on Ultra 64 when it comes out. These graphics are amazing. And they were. The game was released in October 28 of 1994, but a month before that, they were showcasing the beta version at Amusement Expo International. Surprisingly, there was a decent amount of changes between then and the time that the game was released. They were all smaller changes though, things like Cinder's final name. For example, some of the names that he went by before were Pyrotech, Heatshade, Meltdown, Magma, and Afterburner. Saberwolf was Newton or Werewolf. TJ Combo was Mr. Fist. Spinal was Argo. Riptor was Toxin. In the beginning, the game was titled Brute Force, and allegedly buried in the data of the arcade version, there is an alternate title screen with Thriller Instinct. So it's been speculated it was also an alternate title for the game. And in early versions, Orchid was actually absent from the player roster. And believe it or not, the game's original intent was to allow the player to adjust their power, speed, and defense stats, but in the end they decided that it was a bit too much. The game wasn't just innovative from a fighting game perspective, it was also innovative from a hardware perspective. Killer Instinct was the first arcade game to actually implement a hard drive into the system's hardware setup. The ability to implement a hard drive into the system's setup allowed developers to use massive amounts of data, which meant that they could produce these awesome pre-rendered sprites for the characters, which, by the way, were created with silicon graphics, and the backgrounds were pre-rendered movies. The pre-rendered frames would essentially adjust based on the current location of the players. For the time, a dedicated setup like this was an absolute powerhouse. The speed and fluency at which the system was delivering these sprites was absolutely amazing. It was a real-time 64-bit system using 3D rendering to deliver these high-speed fighting game scenarios with complex, well-balanced characters. It was, simply put, unlike anything that we had ever seen before. And it showed. In less than a year, the game had made $250 million and had over 500 billion plays. And for me, the moment I walked into any arcade, I was immediately on the hunt for the Killer Instinct cabinet. And whether it was playing or watching the game, I was absolutely captivated by everything about it. Playing the game next to someone was intimidating too, because there were people who were really good at it, and they were usually the ones standing over the arcade machine dominating it. But playing against the people that were good were also how you got better. The friendly competition that we don't see too much of anymore. And as you can imagine, fighting game fans and gamers were fiending to get their paws on a console port of this. But also, we were patiently awaiting the release of the elusive Ultra 64. And in 1995, our dreams finally started to come true. Kinda.
Here I come.
Yep, that's right. Somehow, Rare managed to port this game to the Super Nintendo. Now, while the Super Nintendo had a very strange architecture compared to some of its other console counterparts, it had its own special abilities and was no slouch. Rare had really impressed with Donkey Kong Country, which gave us all hope for Killer Instinct. But a 100 MHz system with a loaded hard drive versus a 3.5 MHz console? Well, I'd say we only had a few minor disappointments. One of the biggest disappointments for me was the loss of scaling, and you didn't get any of the FMV sequences. And obviously animations were cut down, and you didn't get some of the cool effects that you did in the arcade version. However, none of this takes away from the fact that this port was pretty incredible for what it was at the time. And to top it off, we got Killer Cuts, a badass music CD which had all of the original songs from the arcade on it, as well as some remix stuff. With most of the combo systems intact and the finishers, it made the game really fun to play. One of the interesting things about fighting games to begin with is that the architecture of a fighting game is technically set up to be played in an arcade or a competitive environment where you can play against someone. Now sure, some of us just play to play, and that's great, but these games were never really meant to be in a house, I guess. But bringing the competitive nature of the game home was awesome. So while the SNES version obviously could not stand up to the arcade, it was definitely a worthy port. And then we got this little guy. Now, if you were a gamer back then, there was a good chance you were probably a handheld junkie too. And you either had a Game Boy, Game Gear, or both, but obviously you kind of needed a Game Boy because they always had the first-party Nintendo ports. And to be honest, I could not believe that they ported this game to Game Boy. Now, this is not the original Game Boy that I had when I was little, but that is the original Killer Instinct cart that I got. And I'm not gonna lie, obviously this wasn't close to the arcade version, but it was pretty incredible to have a really playable version of this game in your hands. And for what it was, it looked insanely good. But let me know what you guys think. I'm curious to hear your opinions on the Game Boy version. Did you even know it existed? Have you played it? Did you own it? Let me know down in the comments. Here's a bit of a closer look so you guys can see what the game looked like up close and personal. And while it's nowhere near perfection when it comes to the arcade version, for this size, it's absolute perfection. With only a small 8-bit sharp processor and 8 KB of internal RAM and SRAM, Rare did an absolutely incredible job taking advantage of this system's hardware. Alright, let's take a quick glimpse of a side-by-side comparison of each version of the game. Looking at these side by side, there's obvious differences. One of the things that I really wish they would have been able to bring to the Super Nintendo version was the TVs in the background. This is specific to Orchid Stage because it would either be showing the fight on the TV or it would be playing like the Ultra 64 logo, and it was just a really cool effect to have in that background. Any level of scaling would have been so cool, but that's probably too much to ask for when this cart was already extremely packed. And the fact that it pulled off this hardcore 64-bit game onto the 16-bit console was insane. So back in the 90s, that was about as good as it was gonna get as far as home ports went until we got MAME. Now fast forward to 2022 and Arcade 1UP released their version of Killer Instinct. While the original Rare devs are long gone, fortunately Arcade 1UP and Microsoft both used Code Mystics to develop their version and perfect the online play. And since these modern re-releases were done, Code Mystics has done an incredible job of keeping them up to date and making sure that the online play is stable and good. The modern re-releases included both Killer Instinct and Killer Instinct 2, both of which play absolutely fantastic no matter which platform you choose to play it on. But there is nothing more nostalgic than playing it on a coin-op form factor. or if you're lucky enough, an original coin-op cab. Killer Instinct 1 remains the most iconic version of the game, although any fans of 1 are usually fans of 2 as well, and KI Gold. So when Microsoft released the Killer Instinct remake in 2013, everybody was blown away. And while I can't speak for everyone, I personally absolutely fell in love with it. It really brought back the original feel of the game and put a hardcore modern spin on it. And after they really refined it and released the definitive edition, it remains to be one of my favorite modern remakes. Whether you're a new KI fan or an old KI fan, there's definitely a place for you in the KI community. And there are plenty of great YouTube channels that express their fandom for Killer Instinct regularly. Bushy Stallion is one great example, who focuses mostly on Mortal Kombat, but fighting games in general. And this rings true for Killer Instinct fans. You'll find that most fans, whether they're predominantly a Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat fighting game fan, have a place in their heart for Killer Instinct. Whether it's online or offline fighting, I recommend checking out Daryl's channel. And in the arcade community, you have Twisted Gaming TV, who has both Killer Instinct 1 and Killer Instinct 2, the original coin-ops. As a fan and a collector, he's got a really cool setup in his basement, and definitely give his channel a look if you're a KI fan, or gaming in general. But watch out for Mick Mullet, because he just might slap you around a bit.
Combo breaker. All right.
And last but definitely not least, you have Killer Arcade Games, aka KAG, whose name is obviously inspired by Killer Instinct. He does monthly or weekly streams. If you haven't checked out his channel before, definitely give it a look. He also does arcade restoration and all kinds of other tech stuff, well, with arcades, of course. But his live streams are an absolute blast. And all of this goes to show that Killer Instinct fandom still lives on today. But the question is, are you a fan of Killer Instinct? If you're watching this, I'm gonna assume maybe, probably. I would love to hear your guys' stories. Please feel free to share. And whether you're a longtime fan or a newer fan, I hope that you got something out of this video. Let me know down in the comments what your experience with Killer Instinct was. Thanks for joining me on the journey. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And until next time, I'll see you guys then.